Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. We would like to know you better. Let us know what faculty you are attending, what program you are attending. We have a very excited webinar today with presenters from the Faculty of Law, from the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic. So I'm looking forward to learn more today, and I hope you are as excited as I am. So we're gonna begin today. Just a few rules to keep the webinar running smoothly. You can turn on your camera or keep it off. It's up to your comfort. But please, we would like for you to remain on mute throughout the webinar just to keep it smooth and to allow everybody to stay focused. Feel free to ask any questions during the webinar. We have a Q&A section. This is where you will drop your questions. You don't have to wait till the end to ask your question, but if anything comes up in your head while the presenters are sharing something, feel free to drop your questions. They will be answered at the end. And the webinar is also recorded. It will be posted on the Stuart Clark Center website, just for you to be able to go back and use it as a resource to help you move forward in your entrepreneurial journey. So now here is a quick look on the Stuart Clark Center and what we do here.
Let's talk about entrepreneurship. It's the light bulb moment from your first big idea. It's the decision to set out on a new path. It's the realization that entrepreneurship starts with a spark, and that spark starts here. At the Stu Clark Center, we're here to nurture your ideas and help spark your entrepreneurial spirit. How? How about competitive opportunities to free your inner entrepreneur? Advice from venture coaches who have walked the walk, or some of the best networking events you'll find on campus. You'll find it all right here. By focusing on education, awareness, community, coaching, and connection, we build strong relationships with our students and do everything we can to help them on their journey to self-starting. At the Stu Clark Center, we thrive when you thrive. No idea is too big or too small. The Stu Clark Center is your one-stop shop for everything you need to start your journey. So why not start today?
Why not start today? This is probably my most favorite line of the video. I'm going to introduce myself again for those of you who do not know me. My name is Karen Bado. I am the venture coach here at the Stuart Clark Center for Entrepreneurship, and my role is to support every student across faculty who is looking to learn more about entrepreneurship. It doesn't matter what stage, maybe you just have an idea, or you are running a business, you are getting ready to incorporate or start your business and you have some questions. I would love to support you in your journey. So feel free to book a meeting to discuss your ideas. This is a little bit of my background. I have experience in accounting, as well as business plan writing. And I'm also an entrepreneur, doing a little bit of everything on the side. And I'm not alone. We have a wonderful team here at the Stuart Clark Center ready to support you. We have Deborah Jonathan-Young, our director, Lindsay Friesen, our marketing coordinator, Amy Jones, our program coordinator, and Roxanne Scarp, our office administrator. So any questions you have, feel free to come here. The office is located in the Drake building on the second floor. We are open from 8:30 to 4:30. So feel free to pop up and meet one of us. And if you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to connect with us. We're using a very simple platform linked to my calendar. So if you are looking to book a meeting, it's pretty simple to find my availability. Very simple, again, steps. You have to create your account, book a meeting, and you have now the option to choose an in-person meeting or a virtual meeting. So the choice is yours. We have lined up some great content for you, and I would like to invite you to register now. If you haven't done so, please register to the webinars. Everything is already listed on the website. I'm inviting you for this next one because we have yet again another great speaker who is going to provide some steps if you are looking to purchase a business and become an entrepreneur through acquisition. So you don't want to miss that one next Wednesday. We have another great webinar on marketing. I know there's a lot of questions when it comes to writing a strong marketing strategy, how to really find the customer. So you don't want to miss that one coming on November 23rd. We also have a guest coming and providing insights on how to build a strong marketing strategy. And everything is on the website. Feel free to go now, register, share it with your friends, share it with people you know can beneficiate from attending the webinars. Those are great resources. Those are free to attend. So please tap into that resource anytime you can. So I'm gonna dive right into introducing our guest for today. I am very excited to introduce to you, first of all, Lisa Feinstein and Nick Slonowski, both from the Faculty of Law, both working or supervising any activities from the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic. They are strong partners with the Stu Clark Center for Entrepreneurship. We really, really love working along with the student there. And again, it's a great resource. It's free of charge. They have a very explicit website. Go on there, take a look at the offerings. Make sure that you know don't shy away from working or tapping into the resources that are available for you. And the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic is a great resource. Today we have 3 students from the Faculty of Law here with us. They will be presenting. We have Dion Shang. She's a 3rd-year law student at the University of Faculty. She's interested in different areas, as you can see on the screen. Thank you, Dion, for being here with us. We also have Insane Goldberg. She's amazing. I can already see that just looking at her smile on the picture. She's also a 3rd-year law student at the university. She's looking forward to gain valuable legal experience. And finally, we have Chris Dick. Thank you, Chris, for being here with us today. He's also a 3rd-year law student at the University of Faculty, and they are all volunteering at the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic. So again, the clinic is here to support students from the university who have any questions when it comes to legal, navigating the legal aspect of the business, of life. It's not just about business. Maybe you have other questions and it's not necessarily tied to entrepreneurship. They are still here to support you. And with no further ado, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Karine. Yes, we are excited to be here. I just see Dion's pulling up the slides. So we'll just jump right in. So the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic is a clinic at the Royal Faculty of Law, and it gives us law students an opportunity to sort of get some hands-on practical experience, which can be hard to come by at law school. So as 3rd-year students, we provide information and advise clients. We choose and form business entities. We draft legal documents and conduct legal research, regulatory compliance, good governance, stakeholder activism, and social responsibility, among other things. And in particular, we provide free legal assistance. Everyone likes free. To entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups, innovators, family businesses, nonprofits, charities, artists, and art, culture, and community organizations who either don't have a lawyer or can't afford legal assistance. We often work in conjunction with the Stu Clark Center for Entrepreneurship. We love you guys. And we also work with other organizations. And if you are curious or have any other questions, you can visit our website, which I'll drop in the chat here in a second. We try to provide lots of useful information there. There should be some soft keys and some stuff that you can see. So we'll move on to the disclaimer. I should just say at the outset that this presentation is just for information. It isn't legal advice. We're not lawyers ourselves. We are supervised by lawyers, but we're just providing legal information, not legal advice. If you do actually have a real legal issue, you should seek some real legal advice, and that's just generally best practice. So in terms of an agenda, I will be covering sort of business organizations and some of their legal consequences. Then we'll be moving over to Izan, who will tell us, how do I actually incorporate a business? And we'll go over some of the common forms and questions. And then we'll pass it over to Dion, who will kind of get into the nuance of contractual agreements and intellectual property. In terms of questions, if you do have any questions, please save them till the end, or rather listen to Karine instead, but just generally try to keep your questions general in nature. Try to avoid sharing specific details about your own legal issues. And in the event that you have a question that we just aren't sure about, we'll either defer to our principal lawyers or we'll get back to you. So moving on, I'll just give you sort of an overview. As of June 2022, there were about 1.33 million businesses with employees in Canada. Of those 1.33 million businesses, 1.3 million were small businesses with 1 to 99 employees. Just under 23,000 of those were medium-sized businesses with 100 to 499 employees, and just under 3,000 of those were large businesses with 500 employees or more. So you can see small businesses are quite prominent in Canada's broader business community. And as of June 2022, Manitoba had just over 43,000 of those businesses with employees, and 97, just under 98% of those businesses were classified as small businesses. So some very interesting stuff there. And I'll talk a little bit more about each specific business form next. So many of you are involved in business. This isn't going to be brand new to you, but I should just go over the basics and then kind of speak a little bit about the nuance or the legal ramifications of each business form. So sole proprietorships, generally just an individual that's carrying on business. They're quite informal in nature. Anyone can start a sole proprietorship. There isn't any sort of citizenship or residency requirement. You may still need to register a trade or operating name, and I'll get into that in a second. So if you're a sole proprietor just operating under your own legal name, like if I'm just mowing people's lawns as Chris Dick, I wouldn't need to register any sort of business name, but there are circumstances where you would. So if I was operating as Chris Dick Lawn and Mowing Services, I would actually need, like, anytime you add something to your legal name that modifies it in a way that makes it not your legal name, then you would need to register that as a business name. And if you don't register as a business name, there can be significant fines and other legal consequences. So you always want to make sure you're on top of things. And then sole proprietorships are also subject to unlimited personal liability. So back to that lawn mowing example, if I'm mowing someone's lawn and I accidentally ruin some beautiful new patio landscaping that they just got put in, I'm personally liable for that. So they could sue me and try to recover their damages. So that can be a bit daunting, but we'll talk a little bit more about these other the other structures. So partnerships, generally at least two individuals or entities carrying on a business. Both people and businesses can enter into partnerships. It is very important for partners to have a partnership agreement, and the agreements generally govern the relationship between the partners. And while they aren't a requirement, they're quite important because they outline the responsibilities and protect the interests of each partner. So for an example, like if there isn't a partnership agreement, the law provides that a partnership is dissolved upon death, insolvency, or bankruptcy of any of the partners, or if there's a dispute that can't be resolved. Partnerships can range quite a bit in complexity depending on if there is a partnership agreement or not and what the exact terms and details contained in the partnership agreement are. Partnerships should all have a business name registered with the Manitoba Companies Office, but there aren't any residency or immigration status requirements for having a general partnership. Now there are exceptions, there are always exceptions in law, but that's sort of the general rules. And when registering a business name, you're required to list the business address. So you can list an address outside of Manitoba, but that kind of constitutes a statement that the business has no physical address in Manitoba. So if your business does have a physical address in Manitoba, you actually do have to include it on that business name registration, which is just an important note. And in terms of liability, generally partners and partnerships are exposed to unlimited personal liability, similar to sole proprietorships, but that can be subject to limitation depending on the type of partnership. But yeah, generally partners are joint and severally liable, which means basically that each partner is responsible or can be responsible for the debts and obligations that stem from the partnership, both together and separately. So if someone sues the business for something, they can go after one partner, some of the partners, or all of the partners to recover their damages. And if one partner in the partnership makes a mistake, that the other partners would actually be on the hook for that financially. That's just sort of the structure. Moving on to corporations. So corporations are formed through the process of incorporation, and that creates a distinct legal entity. As Anne will talk a little bit more about that shortly. But they're more complex than sole proprietorships and partnerships generally. The costs for starting and maintaining a corporation are more significant than those of sole proprietorships and partnerships. There are also more documents involved. So requirements such as holding annual meetings, maintaining share records, keeping minute books, and filing an annual return with the company's office are some of the few. And they also receive different tax treatment than other business forms. So corporations are also required to file separate annual corporate tax returns with the CRA. But businesses do enjoy some benefits like tax deferral and low corporate tax rates. They can be publicly or privately owned, and I'll expand on business structure and the concept of legal personhood, which is fascinating in the following slides. Okay, so there are sort of three main groups of people involved in a corporation. There are shareholders, directors, and officers, or sometimes known as management. So shareholders are the ones who own the shares of the corporation. Most corporations have different classes of shares, each of which have different rights. And shareholders sometimes vote on important corporate decisions, such as electing directors, but are not generally involved in the day-to-day operations of the corporation. Directors are in charge of the overarching goals of the corporation. They decide on the long-term vision of the corporation, select officers to carry out the day-to-day operations of the corporation. There's also a requirement that at least 25% of a corporation's directors be residents of Canada. That's both a provincial and a federal requirement. Then moving on to management, which are also known as the officers, are like the CEO, CFO, COOs, et cetera. They're in charge of the day-to-day operations of the company. And the exact responsibilities of the officers are set up by the directors of the corporation and by the bylaws, so they can be quite variable. And the officers basically work to maximize profit for the shareholders. So you can wear multiple hats. You can be a shareholder and a director, or a director and an officer. And that's common, especially in smaller businesses. Each role, whether as a shareholder, director, or officer, does come with distinct rights or responsibilities. So it's very important to understand how each of them apply to you and what your role is. Directors and officers also, there's this concept of fiduciary duty. So every director and officer of a corporation, in exercising their power and discharging their duties, must act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of the corporation. So the general idea is that you must put the interests of the corporation before your own, which means you can't compete with the corporation if you're a director or an officer. And if anything happens where your personal interests might draw you away from your fiduciary duty, you have to avoid that conflict. And directors and officers are also required to exercise the care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances. So there's a lot of case law surrounding these issues, and it can get pretty convoluted quickly. But if you are a director or officer, just know that there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. We'll move on. We'll talk about legal personhood next. So this idea of separate legal personality, it's the idea that a corporation is a separate person from those who own its shares, which are the shareholders, and separate from those who control its large-scale strategic decisions, the directors, and those who manage its operations, the officers. This is the single biggest differentiating characteristic between the different business structures. So the Corporations Act provides that a corporation has the capacity and the rights, powers, and privileges of a natural person, which means, again, it's separate from those who own its shares and form its management. But corporations can sue and be sued. They can buy and sell property. They can enter into contracts. And in the event that they are sued, the personal assets of the shareholders are protected. The corporate structure limits exposure to liability and generally reduces legal risks. Now, I should say you can never completely get rid of them. Like, all transactions carry risk. There's default, loss, negligence, there's breach of contract. There's so many ways, and lawyers are crafty too. They can find problems. There's lots of issues potentially, but the issues can be mitigated through limitation of liability clauses in contracts, by following laws and regulations, just through good business practice generally, and through insurance. So you kind of see each structure has its own quirks, but corporations are generally going to be safest if you're carrying on business or dealing with lots of money. So that sort of concludes my part. I hope you have a better idea about different business structures and some of their legal consequences. And I'll pass it over to Azan now to discuss how do you actually incorporate your business.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So I'll be talking about the process you need to go through in order to incorporate. It's an easy process and it can be done online. So how do you incorporate? Before starting the process, you must have a business name reserved, and this can be done online through the company's office. Once you've completed this step, you can move on to the steps to incorporation. So first, you must file your articles of incorporation. Provincially, you would do this under the Corporations Act, and the cost is about $350 plus tax, as well as a $45 fee for your business name reservation. If you're incorporating federally, it's a similar process. However, you'll be complying with the Canada Business Corporations Act rather than the Provincial Act. And then the cost federally is about $200. Since we're in Manitoba, I'll focus on the process we use here in the province. So up here on the screen, you'll see the information that you should have on hand when you're going through the process of incorporation. So I'll go through these steps in a bit more detail, just to give you a better idea of what the process looks like. So we'll start with naming the corporation. Corporations are given a numbered identification, and this can be used as a corporation's name. So the name is usually a series of numbers followed by Manitoba, and then a legal element like incorporated or limited, for example. If you'd like to give the corporation a different name, you can file a request for a name reservation. And this is done online through the company's office. And you can find all the relevant forms on their website. Once you've reserved your name, you'll have 90 days to file your articles of incorporation. So that's this document that you see on the screen. When you file your articles of incorporation, the name has to match the name of your corporation. So if you've decided to keep the numbered identification as your name, you would use that. But if you've reserved a different name, you can use that one as well. But keep in mind that the new incorporated name must still end with a legal entity like incorporated or limited. Again, this can all be done online through the company's office website. So next, we'll talk about the address of registered office. So the registered office of your corporation is where you must keep the books and records of your corporation. So that includes things like minute books, bylaws, resolutions, articles of incorporation, and other documents like that. So most people opt to keep their corporate documents together for the most part. If it's a Manitoba company that you're a part of, the registered office has to be in Manitoba. If you have a lawyer that's helping you incorporate and helping your company, often people choose to have their registered office at the lawyer's firm. So next we'll talk about the number of directors. On your articles of incorporation, you have to declare at least one director. But if you think you'll want to add directors in the future, you can state a range of numbers. For example, you can say minimum 1 director, maximum 10. But keep in mind, you have to have at least one director listed with their full name and address. So what is the role of a director? Directors of a corporation are responsible for supervising the activities of the corporation and making decisions regarding the activities of the corporation. Directors have to be at least 18 years old, not in bankrupt status, and they must be an individual person. So as Chris talked about earlier, a corporation is considered a legal person, but a corporation cannot be a director. At least 25% of your directors have to be Canadian residents. So usually the person who incorporates the company will be a director, but that doesn't always have to be the case. Incorporators follow many of the same criteria, so they must be at least 18, not in bankrupt status, etc. So the biggest difference is that a corporation can incorporate a company, but the corporation cannot act as a director of that company. Next, we have classes of shares. So shares basically represent ownership in a corporation. When someone buys a share of your company, you'll issue them a share certificate, and the holder of that share certificate becomes a shareholder of your corporation. Anyone can be a shareholder, but yeah, basically it just represents some sort of ownership in the company. In the Articles of Incorporation, there's a section where you'll indicate how many shares you can issue and the different types or classes of shares that you can issue. You can give different classes of shares different restrictions as well. So there's no limit to the number of classes of shares that you can put in your Articles of Incorporation. And just because you indicate a type of share doesn't mean that you have to actually distribute that kind of share. So some people will indicate a lot more classes and numbers of shares than they ever think they'll need to distribute, just so they don't need to go back and update their Articles of Incorporation on the potential growth of their company. But it's also okay to keep the number of shares small, and there's always ways to amend your Articles of Incorporation later on. You can have unrestricted shares or restricted shares. So unrestricted shares will give shareholders rights to vote, dividends. They can receive property upon dissolution of the company, as well as potential other rights. And restricted shares may have restricted rights on them. So for example, they may only give the shareholders the right to vote, but no dividends, or there might be a restriction on the resale of shares without board approval or shareholder approval. So putting restrictions on shares are a good way to retain some sort of control over your company and where the shares end up. And then I'll just add in that it's best practice to consult an accountant on share distribution, mostly for tax purposes. So the next step is a step that we often see forgotten with more inexperienced incorporators, but it's very important to the creation of your company. And that's the organizing of your corporation. So just on the next slide, you'll see some of the important things that you'll do at your first organizational meeting. So the Corporations Act requires that you hold an organizing meeting with directors. And at this meeting, you make bylaws, adopt forms of security certificates, corporate records, appoint officers, appoint auditor to hold office. You can make banking arrangements and transact any other business. So this doesn't need to be a formal meeting, but all the steps must be completed in order to have your corporation properly formed. So now you've filled out your articles of incorporation and held your organizing meeting, but there's more that you have to do. So there are some things that you have to do every year for the upkeep of your corporation. So you have to have an annual general meeting and you have to file your annual general return. These processes can also be done online through the company's office website, just like when you're incorporating. And this step is also very important for keeping your corporation properly active, even if it's a single person corporation. So I hope this section gave you a better idea of the steps that you have to go through in order to incorporate. And if you're going through this process, we do encourage you to seek legal advice or come to the Kerry Vickar Business Law Clinic for free legal help from the students. So now I'll pass it on to Dion for the final segment of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Aizen. So I'm going to move on to the next section, and I'll be covering contracts as well as intellectual property. So we're going to be starting off with contracts today. So I'm sure you've all heard the word contract before, but what exactly is a contract? Well, a contract is a legally binding agreement between two or more parties. For there to be a contract, you must have an offer, acceptance, agreement on material issues, and consideration. So what an offer is it's a promise to do something or to not do something in exchange for certain actions from someone else. This is what we also call performance. So an example of this would be me offering to mow lawns for $20. I'm offering to mow lawns for $20. Next is acceptance. So when somebody agrees to perform the request in the offer in order to get the promise, that's considered acceptance. So another example is if somebody agrees to pay me the $20 for mowing their lawn, that's acceptance. Next up, we have agreement on material issues. So this means that all the important details are decided upon. So I put out the offer to mow lawns for $20, but does the lawn mentioned in the contract include the front and the back? This might be considered a material issue that has to be decided upon before it's a valid contract. And finally, we have what's called consideration. So consideration is a benefit or gain that each party expects to get from the contract. So for example, $20 in exchange for having your lawn mowed. So if somebody put an offer out to mow lawns for free and you ask to have your lawn mowed, that's not considered a contract because the person mowing lawns isn't gaining anything from it. So contracts are a fundamental part of business because they can help your business run more smoothly by ensuring tasks that need to get completed will get completed. And they also help prevent conflicts down the line as well. So various stakeholders that you might form contracts with throughout your business endeavors may include business partners, employees, investors, as well as clients. So next, we'll just talk about the enforceability of contracts. So the first thing we'll start off with is that verbal contracts are actually enforceable. There is a common misconception that verbal contracts aren't valid ones, but they can be enforceable provided that both parties intended to create a contract. So an example of this would be if I went to a garage sale and told Aizen, I'm going to pay you $20 for a mug, and she accepts the $10 in exchange for the mug. This is a contract, even though nothing was written out. So despite verbal contracts being enforceable, certain contracts do have to be in writing. So an example of this would be for real estate transactions. So if you want to buy a house from somebody, this has to be in writing for it to be a valid contract. Contrary, written contracts aren't always enforceable. If there's language that isn't clear in the contract, duress, meaning that somebody is forcing you to enter a contract, a mistake, misrepresentation, fraud, or incapacity, then it's possible for your written contract to be unenforceable. You also don't need a lawyer to make an enforceable contract. You might find it helpful to have a lawyer draft something for you, especially if it's a matter that's more complex, but it's not necessarily a requirement. I will also mention that ending a contract can be very difficult. So you should be very careful when you're signing contracts and ensure that you review everything thoroughly. Once you enter a contract, you typically can't end it unless all of the parties agree to end the contract or if there's a breach of contract. So even in instances where a contract is breached, you might still be stuck in the contract because there might be some way to just remediate it and still have the rest of the contract go through. So if a contract is breached, there are several ways that you can resolve it, which include talking to the other party or parties and giving them the opportunity to resolve any issues, negotiating some sort of a settlement, or considering a lawsuit. I will say that lawsuits are generally a last resort because they can take up a lot of time and it's also very costly to pursue a lawsuit. So next we'll talk about some common business contracts that you might encounter. So these include non-disclosure agreements, terms of use, contracts of sale, licensing agreements, employment agreements, as well as lease agreements. So we're going to be focusing a bit more on non-disclosure agreements today. So a non-disclosure agreement, or an NDA as they're commonly called, is a legal contract between parties that restricts the disclosure of information to parties that aren't part of a contract. So its purpose is to allow parties to share information with each other without it being accessed by outsiders. So for example, if you hire an employee at a restaurant, there might be some secret sauce that this employee has to make, and you don't want other people to know the recipe. So you would get an employee to sign a non-disclosure so that they can't share this secret sauce recipe with others. So this can be useful for ensuring that your ideas and confidential information aren't stolen or shared. So some examples of confidential information can include customer information, financial information, intellectual property, marketing information, or operating information. If you breach a non-disclosure agreement, you can get sued and potentially have to pay damages. So that's the end of NDA. Next, we'll be talking about intellectual property. So there are many different kinds of intellectual property, but we're going to be focusing on 3 different kinds today. The first type are trademarks, which is a sign that is used to distinguish your goods or services from others. This can be a word, design, or a combination. Next is copyright, which is a bundle of rights an owner has in relation to something original that they created. And lastly, we're going to be covering patents, which is ownership granted for the exclusive right to make, use, or sell their invention for a limited time. The 3 of these are all federally regulated. So I'm just going to start off with some examples of trademarks. So these are some trademarks that you'll probably recognize. I'll bring your attention to 3 on here that don't have any words associated with them, but I'm sure most of us can recognize that the golden arches on the bottom left corner belongs to McDonald's. The little apple there belongs to Apple, and the green logo on the bottom right corner is the Starbucks logo. So despite there not being any words associated with it, it's still a trademark and it's an established brand that they've created, and you recognize it despite the fact it's not labeled that it's Starbucks or Apple. So a trademark might be suitable for you if you plan on establishing some sort of a brand. Trademarks may include one or a combination of words, sounds, designs, tastes, colors, textures, scents, moving images, 3-dimensional shapes, modes of packaging, or even holograms. They're used to distinguish the goods or services of one person or organization from those of others. Excuse me. So if you think about McDonald's, they have a bunch of trademarks, including their name, their golden arches logo, and their slogan, "I'm loving it." These trademarks that McDonald's owns helps distinguish them from other companies. Trademarks don't have to be formally registered for them to be recognized, although registering it can provide you some more protection. So if you register a trademark, you can benefit from having it recognized Canada-wide. So if you're in Winnipeg and register your trademark, even people in Vancouver can't use your trademark, which can be a great option if you're potentially planning on expanding your business. In the event you use a trademark that's already being used by somebody else, you may be liable for what's called passing off or infringement. If you're found to be passing off or infringing on somebody's trademark, you can have an injunction filed against you, which means you have to stop using the trademark, and it's also possible for you to get sued. So given that there are consequences for using trademarks that aren't yours, you can actually conduct a search of registered trademarks on the Canadian Intellectual Property Office website. So this is a free website to use, and checking it can help ensure that you aren't infringing on others' right to a trademark. Next up, we're going to be talking about copyright. So copyright is automatically applied to any original work at the time of creation, but registering this can help offer you more protection as well. If somebody infringes on your copyrighted work and it's registered, you'll receive, if you register it, you'll have a certificate of registration, and it can serve as evidence that the work truly belongs to you. So in the event somebody infringes on your copyrighted work, you have that to support yourself. So the creator of the work is the owner unless there's an agreement that says otherwise. And copyright lasts for the lifetime of whoever holds the copyright plus 50 years after the end of death. So this is going to be changing to 70 years within a month or so due to a Canada, United States, Mexico agreement. However, as of now, the Copyright Act still states 50 years. So just be mindful of the changes that are going to be occurring soon though. If you use somebody's work and your product that you didn't make yourself, you may be infringing on someone else's copyright as well. So that's something you should always be mindful of. So let's talk about how we can avoid infringing on someone else's copyright. So to use somebody's copyrighted work, the copyright must be transferred through a license or an assignment. A license allows a party to use the work, but the creator still has ownership and rights associated. What an assignment does is it transfers all or some of the rights to another party for the entire term of the copyright or a specific period. So I mentioned earlier that oral agreements can be valid contracts, but in the case of licenses and assignments, they have to be in writing and registered at the Copyright Office. So despite the limitations with the use and copyrighted work, there are exceptions to copyright infringement under Section 29 of the Copyright Act, which talks about what's called fair dealing. So you can use copyrighted work if it's for research, private study, education, parody, or satire. If you have a criticism review or news report, that can also be considered fair dealing, provided that you mention the source and who the creator of the work is. And the last type of intellectual property we'll be touching on today is patents. So if you have an invention that you want to protect for a limited time, then you might want to consider registering a patent. For a patent, you'll have to disclose how you created your invention to the public in exchange for a limited time monopoly. So if your invention is something that you want to essentially keep a secret forever, then a patent might not be what you're looking for, and you might want to look more along the lines of a non-disclosure agreement and so forth. It can be difficult to get a patent as well because guidelines for obtaining a patent are quite rigorous, and it's also a very time-consuming process. Beyond this, they can also be very expensive to obtain, and there are continued costs for having a patent, which are some reasons why you might want to think very carefully before a patent is something you want to pursue. Further, our clinic actually doesn't deal with patents because you need to have a registered patent agent to assist with them. In terms of providing information, though, we can probably still provide some information about patents, but we just can't file anything for you. So this brings us to the end of the IP section of our presentation, and we hope that you found the information we provided today useful. If you're wondering whether your next step is in the right direction, we invite you to visit the Business Law Clinic website by scanning the QR code on the left there. This website will refer you to many Manitoba and federal resources depending on the topic that you want to delve into. And if you're interested in scheduling an appointment and meeting with us, you are more than welcome to do so as well. You can scan the QR code on the right-hand side there to complete a client intake form. And you can also find this client intake form on our website as well. So I'm just going to hand things back to Kerry now.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was so insightful. Thank you for taking the time to go through all these important information for anyone who's thinking of running a business or opening a practice. I don't have any question in the chat yet, so I'm just encouraging the participant to drop in a question and get a prize from the Stu Clark Center. I'll just give you guys a few seconds, but I do have a few points that I would like to share and maybe get some feedback from you all. I always meet international students, and I get that question a lot. Can I open a business? Can I run a practice even though I have a student permit? I'm not quite sure. So what will be your advice if a student is asking such question? They go to the clinic and they ask you a question like that. Like, what would you say to them?
Yes, I'll take that one. So in terms of the different business structures, again, we have sole proprietorships, we have partnerships, and we have corporations. Sole proprietorships and partnerships basically have no residency requirements. So international students, basically anybody can sort of carry those businesses on. Again, always exceptions with certain kinds of partnerships, but that's sort of the general rule. And with corporations, same thing. Again, if you recall, there's shareholders, directors, and officers/managers. And the directors, there's a requirement both provincially and federally that 25% of them are residents of Canada. So, if an international student wants to start a corporation, they would have to have at least one resident of Canada, basically, that's also sitting as a director. But that's really the only requirement as far as residency or anything that would affect international students. And that there are obviously tax implications. Again, you should see a proper lawyer, see a proper accountant, but those are sort of the general rules.
I mean, that's great. I like that you guys always mention you have to seek legal counsel, like you have to because it's so great. Sometimes people can understand a certain thing, and then and I'm gonna ask another question. Have you guys dealt with any conflict that went to a lawsuit? Do you have any story that you can share with us? Maybe a situation where someone was not clear enough in the contract and was then taken to court or stuff like that. Like, I just want to hear a little bit of your experience in terms of dealing with some cases of litigation or, lawsuit and stuff like that.
I don't think that any of us students have experience personally dealing with, I mean, we of course have read all the cases, but I don't know if we have any personal experience. Maybe I'll maybe ask Nick or Lisa if they want to jump in.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Okay. I know sometimes it's a little bit too real, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's everything for today. No question. We had a very quiet audience. But yeah, thank you so much again for taking the time to be with us today. We have a partnership again for everyone listening. We have a strong partnership with the Business Law Clinic. We are all here to support you if you have any questions in your entrepreneurial journey or any question of a legal matter. Feel free to check out the website. It's an amazing resource available to every student at the University of Manitoba. And again, thank you so much for being with us. We're just gonna conclude for the rest of the day and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.